The galaxy had long since settled into its order, an unspoken hierarchy that placed humanity at the bottom. Among the stars, where the Zalkan, the Threx Dominion, and the Zelith hierarchy held dominion, humanity was little more than an afterthought. Weak, short-lived, primitive, the laughingstock of the galactic community, and Captain Elias Voss had spent his entire career choking down that reality, one bitter sip at a time. His ship, the Iron Resolve, was a relic by concordant standards. Human vessels were cobbled together from repurposed alien tech, patchworked with stubborn ingenuity and desperate ambition. The Iron Resolve had seen too many battles. Its hull scorched and dented by skirmishes humanity was never supposed to win. Voss stood on the bridge, his eyes locked onto the vast abyss of uncharted space ahead. Beyond the viewport, a dying star bled light into the void, its gravity well-twisting space-time into jagged distortions. Beside him, Dr. Leora Senna pored over ancient symbols flashing across her datapad, her fingers shaking with barely contained excitement. The signals had led them here, anomalous readings from a derelict construct orbiting the event horizon of the black hole. An artifact left behind by the architects, a species so advanced they had ceased to exist long before the current empires had crawled from their primordial oceans. "This could change everything," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone in particular. Proof that the architects weren't just myths, that they left something behind. Sergeant Khalid Omari remained silent, his gaze lingering on the tactical display. He wasn't a man of science. He was a man of war, and war had taught him that whenever humanity stumbled upon something that could change everything, it usually meant someone else would come to take it. And they did. The Iron Resolve's sensors flared red as an incoming fleet tore through the void, emerging from the blackness like predators sensing wounded prey. The Zalkan Dominion had arrived, sleek warships of ebony and crimson, their hulls pulsing with the eerie glow of living technology. The lead vessel broadcasted a message in perfect galactic standard, but the contempt in the voice was unmistakably alien. "Humans, your presence here is a violation of concordance law. Withdraw immediately or be exterminated." Voss didn't flinch. He had heard that threat before. Too many times. "We're not leaving," he said, voice steady, unwavering. The Zalkan commander's laughter was a low, guttural thing, a sound of absolute certainty. "You persist in this delusion of defiance. You are insects in a kingdom of giants. You do not belong here." And then they fired. The first salvo struck with the force of a dying star. Shields groaned under the strain, energy crackling across the Iron Resolve's battered hull. The ship lurched, alarms wailing as damage reports flooded the interface. Omari barked orders, weapons firing back in a desperate attempt to hold the line. But they all knew the truth. Humanity's ships were outclassed, their weapons mere pebbles against titanic war machines. Dr. Senna barely noticed. Her gaze was fixed on the ancient structure below, its dormant mechanisms flickering to life as the black hole's gravity began to shift. And then, a pulse. Not a weapon, not an explosion. Something else. It rippled through the Iron Resolve, through the human bodies within it. A silent, invisible wave that hummed through their bones, seared into their neurons. Voss gasped as his vision sharpened, every detail of the battle unfolding around him in perfect clarity. Omari's pulse pounded in, his ears, his muscles tightening with newfound strength. Senna felt the impossible, the presence of something vast, something ancient, moving through her mind like a whisper at the edge of consciousness. For the first time in history, the human body, frail, inefficient, flawed, was changing, and the Zalkan saw it. The laughter stopped. The pulse from the derelict structure reverberated through the ship's core, setting the crew on edge. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, like a collective breath held in suspense. The very air inside the Iron Resolve felt thick, alive, humming with some invisible force. Captain Voss's heart raced, but his instincts had already kicked. In his mind raced through scenarios. Was it a trap, a weapon, or something far worse? On the bridge, Omari's hands flew over the control panels, issuing commands to counteract the alien strike. The Zalkan warships were formidable, yet their shots had barely made a dent in the Iron Resolve's hastily upgraded shields. The moment the pulse had hit, the ship's energy systems had surged, stabilizing their defenses in an unexplainable, almost supernatural way. Voss had never seen anything like it. "Status report," he barked, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. The crew scrambled, shields holding at 70%. "No major structural damage," came the terse reply from the engineer. The crew moved quickly, falling into an unusual unity. Even Omari, ever the skeptic, seemed to sense the importance of what lay ahead. Minutes later, the Iron Resolve was locked in orbit around the derelict station, its surface an eerie, geometrically precise array of sharp angles and smooth curves impossible to fully comprehend. It was a machine more than a building, ancient yet functional in a way that no organic species could ever replicate. The station was covered in layers of strange metallic plating, each piece aligned with a precision that spoke to a higher intelligence, perhaps one that had long since passed. The landing bay doors opened, and the crew, heavily armed, descended into the heart of the unknown. Inside, the air was cold, the silence absolute. The structure's lighting was dim, with only faint pulses of blue energy flowing through the walls like veins of some immense beast. At first, nothing stirred. No alarms, no threats, only the echo of their footsteps as they moved deeper into the heart of the station. But as they ventured further, they found something that stopped them in their tracks. A massive chamber, its walls lined with intricate designs. At its center stood a pedestal, and on it a glowing core. The core pulsed softly, almost invitingly. It was as if the station itself was aware of their presence, aware of their actions. "This is it," Senna breathed, eyes wide in wonder. "The source of the pulse. It's alive somehow." Voss stepped forward, his voice low. "What do you mean, alive?" Senna's fingers hovered over the holographic interface that flickered above the pedestal. "The core, whatever this is, has intelligence. It's reacting to us. I can feel it." Just as Senna touched the core, the entire station shuddered. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the metal floor beneath their boots. The lights flickered, and then the voice came. Not from the station, not from any creature they could see. It was a voice that rang through their minds, cold and ancient, the very tone of it scraping against their sanity. "You have unlocked the dormant seed. You are no longer mere mortals. You are becoming." Senna staggered back, clutching her head as the voice crashed against her mind. "It's in my head. I can't." The room shifted, bending and warping around them as if reality itself was being altered. Omari steadied Senna, his hand gripping her shoulder, but even his unflappable demeanor cracked under the intensity of the moment. And then, with a sudden heart-stopping clarity, Voss understood what they were dealing with. The architects had not just left a piece of technology behind, they had left a legacy. The core was not simply an artifact, it was a seed, designed to cultivate humanity into something more, something that could challenge the very gods of the galaxy. They had been chosen. And now, humanity was on the verge of becoming giants. The pulse from the core faded, but the unease lingered. Captain Voss stood motionless, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The air in the chamber had thickened, charged with something ancient, something that shouldn't have been possible. His thoughts raced, trying to piece together the fragments of what they had just encountered. His mind felt different, sharper, like something had clicked into place. He could see the room around him in vivid clarity, every crack in the walls, every glint of light bouncing off the metal floor. But it wasn't just sight. It was as if his entire perception of reality had expanded, stretched, and taken on a new depth. Senna steadied herself, her face pale but her eyes alight with wonder. "Did you hear that? Did you feel it? It's inside us now, Captain. Whatever this is, it's altering us. It's awakening something." Omari, his hand still resting on Senna's shoulder, scanned the room with an alert, calculating gaze. "I'm not sure I'm liking this, Doc. This feels like something we're not meant to touch." Voss turned to face him. "You're right, Khalid. We weren't meant to touch it, but we have. And now we need to understand what we've awoken, for better or worse. Senna, despite her obvious shock, looked up at Voss with unwavering conviction. We need to study it. We can't turn back now. The signal, it's in our bodies, our minds. The pulse wasn't just from the core. It's adapting us. Our evolution, it's accelerating. Her words were soaked in both fear and awe. It was the kind of revelation that could shake the foundations of any civilization. Humanity, once seen as weak and fragile, had just been given a gift, or perhaps a curse that no one could have predicted. They were no longer the underdogs in the galaxy. They were something more. The question was, would they be able to control it? As they made their way back to the Iron Resolve, their bodies already beginning to hum with strange, newfound energy, Voss couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they weren't the only ones aware of what had happened. The Zalkan had retreated, yes, but they would be back. And they wouldn't be coming alone. Back on the Iron Resolve, the crew worked quickly to analyze the data gathered from the core. Every touch of the glowing artifacts, every scan of the ancient symbols, seemed to trigger a chain reaction, flooding their minds with bursts of knowledge, with visions that stretched far beyond their understanding. It wasn't just knowledge of the architects, it was knowledge of the entire universe. How stars were born, how empires rose and fell, how life, in its infinite forms, evolved and expanded. Voss watched the data streams, his mind racing, but something about it felt wrong. Like the more they learned, the more they exposed themselves to forces they couldn't yet comprehend. Then, the comms crackled. A stern voice cut through the static. Captain Voss, this is Commander Delvok of the Zalkan Dominion. We advise you to surrender. The Galactic Concordance has ordered your immediate return to the core systems. You are a threat to the stability of the galaxy. Your enhancements are an abomination. Voss's lips curled into a wry smile. Delvok, I thought you'd be back. Tell your masters that we're not going anywhere. The voice on the comms hesitated, then resumed with a tone colder than ice. You misunderstand, Captain. This is not a negotiation. The Iron Resolve is surrounded by a fleet of over 50 Zalkan warships. Surrender now, or face extinction. Extinction, Voss repeated with a dark chuckle. You should be worried about that, not us. If the Iron Resolve goes down, then your precious fleet will be the ones dying. The comms fell silent. Voss turned to Senna, who was already scanning the readings on her console. The pulse had given them more than just physical enhancement. It had given them a key, a gateway to something far greater. Do we have control of the core's systems yet? Voss asked, his tone sharp. Senna nodded, her eyes gleaming with something akin to fear. Not fully, but I'm close. The core is linked to the entire station. I think we can manipulate it, Captain. We could turn its power against them. We're not running this time, Voss commanded. Senna's fingers flew across the interface. The walls of the Iron Resolve seemed to pulse in rhythm with her movements. The ship's engines hummed at an unnatural frequency, the air crackling with energy. Something was happening. They were no longer just humans trying to survive in a hostile galaxy. They were something else, something more. And the Zalkan would soon find out exactly what that meant. It wasn't long before the Iron Resolve was met with the first wave of Zalkan ships, their sleek vessels gliding through the blackness like predators closing in on their prey. The battle was inevitable, but now there was an edge, a brutal, unforgiving edge that humanity had never had before. The Iron Resolve's weapons flared to life, not with the sluggish fire of human-made technology, but with a deadly efficiency that seemed alien, as though the core had forged new weapons out of their very will. The Zalkan ships took hit after hit, their shields buckling under the force of the newly activated human firepower. Omari, at his station, grinned with a savage joy that surprised even him. They're falling back. Captain, But Voss wasn't paying attention to the enemy retreat. He was too busy watching Senna, who had fallen into a trance-like state, her eyes locked onto the data streams from the core. He could feel it too, the pull of the power. the ancient knowledge pouring into them, unlocking something inside their DNA. "I can feel it," Senna whispered, her voice shaky but filled with awe. We're becoming more. It's like we're part of the core now, part of something greater." And that was when the first major fracture occurred. A low rumble shook the ship and a flash of red light filled the cockpit. Omari jerked upright, his face drained of color. "They're not retreating," Omari said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "The Zalkan are regrouping, but they're bringing reinforcements and they've allied with the Threx. There's a fleet of at least 100 ships now. This isn't a skirmish anymore. It's a war." Voss looked to Senna, his mind torn. What had they done? They had struck back at the galactic powers, sure, but in doing so, they had triggered something far bigger. Humanity had just become the galaxy's biggest threat, and in doing so they had sparked a war that might tear apart everything they had fought for. "Prepare for impact," Voss muttered grimly. "They've awakened the beast, and now we need to learn how to control it before it destroys us all." The sound of approaching battle was unmistakable. Outside the iron resolve, the blackness of Captain Voss stood at the helm, his hands gripped tightly on the console, his mind clear and razor-sharp in a way he'd never experienced before. His skin thrummed with an electric pulse. His body was stronger, faster. The enhancements granted by the core were still fluctuating, but the ship's core systems were attuned to their rhythms. Humanity was no longer just a player in the galaxy. They had become a force unto themselves. "Captain, incoming!" Omari's voice cut through the tension like a knife. The tactical display showed incoming projectiles, energy beams, plasma torpedoes, racing toward them with overwhelming force. The Zalkan and Threx were launching their final assault. Senna stood beside Voss, eyes wild with a strange kind of excitement. "We can do this. We must do this. I can feel it. The core. It's part of us now. I can guide its power, amplify it, redirect it through the ship's systems. But we have to sync with it. Every person aboard must connect to it. Every mind." Voss's gaze hardened. "Then we make sure that no one leaves this ship alive if they threaten us." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, yet there was an undeniable truth to them. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long. It was time to make them see what humanity had become. Omari nodded, his face grim but resolute. "I'll get the crew ready for synchronization. We won't go down without a fight." As the alien ships closed in, the Iron Resolve's engines hummed to life. The crew members, now aware of their enhanced abilities, began to connect with the core's vast hidden network. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was an extension of themselves. The Iron Resolve, now a living organism, symbiotic with humanity's newfound strength. Voss could feel it in his chest, a deep, resonant pulse that matched the heartbeat of the station. The Zalkan and Threx fleets fired, but this time, the Iron Resolve didn't flinch. It dodged and weaved with almost supernatural precision. The shields, no longer just defensive barriers, twisted space around them, warping the incoming fire into harmless eddies of nothingness. The ship moved as if it was part of the crew, part of Voss himself. "Target locked," Omari called out, his voice steady and confident. "Captain, I've got their main flagship in sight, firing on my mark." Senna's voice crackled through the comms, calm but urgent. "Do it. We have to take out their leadership or they'll never stop. We can't afford a prolonged fight. We'll never win that way." Voss nodded once, a brief, sharp motion. Fire. The Iron Resolve unleashed hell. Energy beams shot out from the ship's weapons, striking the Zalkan flagship with the force of a collapsing star. The vessel's shields failed in an instant, its hull buckling under the unprecedented power of humanity's new weaponry. In a heartbeat, the flagship disintegrated into a ball of fire and twisted metal. Omari grinned, his voice rough with satisfaction. "That's how it's done." But it wasn't over. The battle was just beginning. The Zalkan and Threx fleets, reeling from the destruction of their flagship, quickly regrouped. They had underestimated humanity's newfound power, but they would not make the same mistake twice. Another wave of ships arrived, their weapons now focused on the Iron Resolve. The battle seemed endless, a cascade of explosions and energy arcs streaking across the void. Voss watched as his crew fought, their actions both desperate and resolute. The pulse from the core had transformed them. Yes, but it had also exposed them to a darker side. The constant awareness, the raw power, the near-constant hum in their minds. It was becoming harder to control. Every new use of the core's energy demanded something of them, something human. And the more they used it, the more they felt the strain. Senna staggered back from the interface, her face contorted with pain. "Captain, it's too much. I can't hold on much longer. The core's power, it's too volatile. We're pushing it to the limit." Her voice trembled with a fear Voss had never heard from her before. Voss clenched his fists. "We're not stopping now. If we stop, if we give in to fear, it's over for us. For everyone, we keep fighting. We decide when it ends." But even as he spoke, Voss could feel it too. The power coursing through him was too much, too vast to fully comprehend. And yet the battle raged on, the enemy relentless in their attempts to break them. In a split-second decision, Omari turned to Voss, his face set with grim resolve. "I'll go to the lower deck. I'll manually reroute the core's energy flow. We need a full overload to break their lines." Voss opened his mouth to protest, but Omari was already moving, his steps sure and fast as he disappeared into the lower levels of the ship. Seconds later, a massive shockwave rocked the iron resolve, throwing everyone to the ground. A blinding light erupted from below decks. The core, its energy now pushed to dangerous limits, detonated in a burst of energy that rippled across the battlefield. The alien fleets faltered, their ships racked with unnatural gravitational distortions. They couldn't escape. They couldn't evade the pull of the iron resolve's power. It was too much. Omari's final message crackled through the comms. "We're doing this, Captain. For humanity." And then, there was nothing. When the light faded, the enemy was broken. The Zalkan and Threx ships caught in the gravity storm, caused by the core's overload, were scattered across space like shattered fragments of a broken mirror. The battlefield was silent, save for the hum of the iron resolve. Its crew now bonded in a way no one could understand, but all could feel. But victory, as they had learned, was never without its price. The battle was won. But Voss couldn't shake the haunting feeling that they had just awakened something even bigger than the Zalkan and Threx fleets. As he surveyed the damage, he realized that the galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had won. But at what cost? Senna, her face pale and drawn, approached him, her eyes clouded with a mixture of awe and sorrow. We did it. But Captain, we've changed. We're not the same people anymore. We've opened something that might consume us." Voss looked at her, at the crew now standing together, united by a power they hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. "I know," he said quietly. "But we have to decide what we do with this power. We don't get to walk away from it. And the galaxy? The galaxy is ours to protect or destroy." The dust of battle had settled, but the weight of what had transpired lingered, thick and oppressive. The iron resolve hung in the void, silent but for the hum of its systems, the ship still pulsing with the power it had drawn from the core. Outside the viewports, the wreckage of the Zalkan and Threx fleets floated like abandoned husks, remnants of a war that had no clear victor, only a shifting of power in a galaxy that was no longer sure of itself. Captain Voss stood on the Gai bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out into the abyss. He could still feel the pulse of the core inside him, a constant thrum that echoed through every cell of his body. His thoughts were sharp, clearer than ever before, but there was something else, a lingering darkness, a fear of what they had truly become. The crew had begun to recover, their enhancements fluctuating between bursts of strength and profound exhaustion. The core's power had unlocked something deep within them, a dormant potential that had been buried for eons. But with that gift came a price, and no one knew how much longer they could hold on to the power without losing themselves in the process. Senna, her face pale but determined, entered the bridge. She had been working tirelessly to analyze the data they had gathered, trying to make sense of the cascading transformations they were undergoing. "Captain," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and unease. "I've been monitoring the crew's neural activity. We're evolving. It's not just physical. The core's influence is changing us on a deeper level. Our thoughts, our emotions. We're becoming something else." Voss turned to face her, his eyes hard. "We already knew that, Senna. The question is, what are we going to do about it? This isn't just about power anymore. It's about control. If we don't manage this, we might lose ourselves. We might become something we can't control." Senna nodded, her eyes clouded with the weight of her own thoughts. "I don't know what the core wants from us or if it's even still listening. But if we don't figure out how to stabilize it, we'll be just like the Zal Khan and the Threx, tools of a power we can't understand." Voss looked back out, at the wreckage, the dead ships, the broken alliances. "We've become the weapon now. The galaxy won't know what hit them, and they'll either fear us or try to destroy us." But even as the words left his lips, Voss knew that humanity had already changed beyond recognition. The battle was over, but the real struggle had just begun. They had won, yes, but what did it mean to win when the very thing they had fought for was now a ticking time bomb inside their own minds? Days passed in a surreal quiet. The crew of the Iron Resolve left to wrestle with the consequences of their newfound abilities. The ship had become a sanctuary, a place where they could learn to master the energy coursing through them. The Zal Khan and Threx, crippled by their defeat, had retreated into their corners of the galaxy, nursing their wounds and licking their pride. But they hadn't forgotten. The Concordance, the powerful interstellar council that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant, was now watching. Their ambassadors, cloaked in secrecy and diplomatic double-dealing, had begun sending envoys to human-held territories. And humanity, for the first time in its history, was being treated as an equal, or perhaps more accurately, a threat. The question of what to do next loomed over them. Should they push forward, expanding their new power, making allies or enemies along the way? Or should they retreat, isolate themselves from the galaxy and safeguard what they had? Voss found himself sitting alone in his quarters, his hands resting on the edge of the desk. The holographic interface before him flickered with images of the wrecked fleets, the broken alliances. In the silence, his mind wandered back to the words of the architect AI. "You have unlocked the dormant seed. You are no longer mere mortals. You are becoming." What did that even mean? He had once believed that humanity's greatest strength lay in its resilience, its ability to adapt, to survive. But now it seemed their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. The temptation to wield the power they had unlocked was overwhelming. How long before they lost themselves in it? How long before they became the very thing they had once fought against? The door to his quarters opened, and Senna stepped inside, her eyes searching his face for something she couldn't quite put into words. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Voss didn't need to ask what she meant. They both understood that this wasn't just about their battle with the Zal Khan or the Threx. It was about their very nature, their future. "You feel it, don't you?" Senna continued. "The pull of the core. It's like we're drifting towards something we can't control." Voss stood up, turning toward her. "I feel it, but we can't back down now, Senna. We've already crossed the line. There's no going back." Senna's face tightened. "And that's what scares me. We've changed. The galaxy sees us as either gods or monsters, and we can't decide which one we are." For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of the decision pressed down on them both. Finally, Voss spoke, his voice low, almost reluctant. "We have to choose. We either stand with the galaxy, offering an alliance, or we fight to protect what we've just become. But we can't be both. Not anymore." Senna nodded slowly. "And what if we fail? What if we become something we can't control? What if we destroy everything?" "We don't fail," Voss replied, his voice filled with a cold certainty. We can't afford to. The Iron Resolve remained in orbit, a symbol of both humanity's triumph and its uncertainty. The ship had become more than just a vessel. It was a reflection of humanity itself, caught between the potential for greatness and the risk of self-destruction. As the crew prepared for the next phase of their journey, the galaxy itself was in turmoil. The Concordance, once too proud to acknowledge humanity, was now desperate to understand the force they had become. Alliances were forming, new treaties being drafted, and old empires were reconsidering their place in the galactic order. But, above all else, one question echoed through every mind. Would humanity rise as the galaxy's new rulers, or fall as its greatest mistake? For now, the future was uncertain, but Voss, Senna, Omari, and the rest of the crew knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would no longer be the ones waiting for fate to decide their future. They would be the ones who decided, and with that thought, they set their course for the stars. The Iron Resolve drifted deeper into the galaxy, the stars around it twinkling like distant dreams. The crew, once bound by the fragility of human limitations, now felt like something more. Their minds and bodies had been transformed by the core, their perceptions sharpened to a degree that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. They had become the next step in humanity's evolution, a force that could either save or shatter the galaxy. Voss stood alone on the observation deck, gazing out at the endless sea of stars. His face was drawn, the weight of what they had become etched into every line. He had never felt so alive and so adrift. The universe, once so vast and unknowable, now seemed small, contained within his reach. Yet, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they had unleashed something beyond their control, something ancient. Behind him, Senna entered quietly, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The air was thick with the same unspoken understanding that had hung between them for weeks now. The core was a gift, yes, but it was also a curse. They had embraced it, welcomed its power, but its true purpose remained a mystery. Was it a tool of salvation or a harbinger of doom? The Concordance is assembling, Senna said softly, her voice carrying the same weight of inevitability that Voss felt. The empires are coming to terms with what happened, and they're scared. They're scared of us. Voss turned to her, his gaze intense. Do they fear what we've become? Or what we could become? Senna looked away, her expression unreadable. Both. A quiet moment passed between them, filled with the hum of the ship's systems and the quiet rush of distant stars. They were alone together, bound by the power they had unlocked and the uncertainty it brought. The galaxy had changed, and so had they. What are we going to do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Voss didn't answer immediately. His mind was a whirl of possibilities. Alliances, wars, betrayals. Humanity's role in the universe was now a question that had no clear answer. They had already become something different, something the galaxy couldn't ignore. We wait, he said finally. For now, we wait. As Voss turned back to the viewport, the stars glistening like promises on the horizon, a single, static-filled transmission came through, faint but unmistakable. The words that followed echoed with an eerie finality. Humanity was our final hope. But are you ready? The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only the silence of space in its wake. Voss's hand tightened on the railing, his expression darkening. Senna approached him, her gaze unwavering. Who was that? Voss's eyes narrowed. I don't know. But I think we've just unlocked something bigger than we realize. And I don't think we're ready for it. He turned to her, his eyes hard with resolve. But we will be. The Iron Resolve sailed onward into the unknown, its crew now more than just humans. They were the embodiment of humanity's greatest potential and its greatest risk. And ahead of them lay a future that neither the galaxy nor they themselves could predict.